All right, so today we're going deep inside Graceland, but uh, not like the usual tourist visit.
Right.
We've got something special lined up. We're looking at this YouTube interview with Jerry Schilling,
Yeah.
and he was one of Elvis's closest friends and actually lived at Graceland.
Lived there.
It's like getting a backstage pass to the real Graceland, the
Yeah.
the home, not just the museum.
This is exciting because it really does give us a peek behind the curtain and we get to hear firsthand what it was like to live with the king.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. How many people can say they borrowed Elvis Presley's Rolls Royce as a teenager?
Wait a minute, he actually says that in the interview.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I am really intrigued now.
Yeah.
But before we get into all the juicy stories, let's kind of set the stage a little bit.
Okay.
There are all these myths and misconceptions about Graceland.
Right.
People say it was too small, that Elvis was isolated there, almost like in a gilded cage. And
Yeah.
we're going to debunk those myths one by one using Jerry's insights.
I love it. I love it. That's what's so great about Jerry's perspective is he wasn't just a visitor. He was really in the inner circle and experienced everyday life at Graceland.
Yeah?
The rhythm of the
Yeah.
place.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
myth number one, Graceland being a prison.
Right.
Jerry makes it very clear that Elvis chose this life. He worked hard for it, and he loved being Elvis Presley.
He did, and he curated Graceland to be his sanctuary. It wasn't just about security and privacy, it was about creating an environment where he was relaxed, he felt comfortable, and could really just be himself.
Okay, but how exactly did he do that? I mean, what made Graceland different from, say, just a luxury hotel, besides, the obvious musical talent?
Well, I think that's where Jerry's stories really help to paint the picture for us.
Yeah.
For Elvis, it was all about family and close friends. I remember that anecdote where he talks about Elvis always stopping to talk to his grandmother before heading out for his movie nights.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It really does.
That illustrates that whole family atmosphere that he talks about.
Exactly. And it wasn't just his grandmother, his father, his mother, Lisa Marie Priscilla. They all lived at Graceland at various times.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
it wasn't this lonely mansion as people think. It was a bustling family home.
Right.
And it was designed for that. Think about the layout, the open living spaces, the game rooms, the racquetball court, everything geared towards socializing and spending time together.
Which makes sense because Jerry mentions that Elvis loved having people around.
Mm-hmm.
Did he say anything about, like, what kind of entertainment they had at Graceland?
Mm-hmm.
I bet those parties were wild.
Well, he does talk about the late night movie screenings,
Yeah.
which would often turn into these spontaneous jam sessions.
Oh, well.
And then there are impromptu karate matches in the living room.
Wait a minute. Karate in the living room.
Remember, Elvis was a black belt.
That's right. He was.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to hear more about that. But before we get sidetracked by flying kicks,
Okay.
let's get back to debunking the myths.
Oh.
What about the size of Graceland? Some people think it's smaller than they expected.
That's a really common misconception, and I think it's all relative.
Yeah.
Compared to Elvis's modest upbringing in Tupelo, Graceland was a palace.
Right.
Jerry even says you could practically fit Elvis's childhood home inside the Graceland living room.
Wow. That's a crazy image to think about.
It is.
So while it might not be a mega mansion by today's standards,
Right.
for its time, and especially coming from Elvis's background,
Mm-hmm.
it was a symbol of his extraordinary success.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's fascinating to consider the architectural details of the time.
Yeah.
Graceland was built in the late 1930s
Okay.
in this colonial revival style, which was very popular in the South.
Uh-huh.
It represented a certain level of prestige and grandeur back then.
So even in its design, Graceland reflected a specific era and cultural context.
Absolutely. It wasn't just a random mansion. It was a statement.
As a statement.
And it's important to remember that Elvis was always updating and expanding Graceland to suit his needs and his tastes. He added the famous jungle room, the racquetball court, the meditation garden, all reflecting different aspects of his personality and interests.
So we've tackled the prison myth and the size myths, but what about the idea that Elvis was isolated at Graceland?
Well, remember, the upstairs of Graceland was and still is off limits to the public.
Yeah.
And this was out of respect for Lisa Marie's wishes.
Right.
And it contributes to that lingering mystique surrounding Elvis.
It's almost like a physical representation of the boundary between his public persona and his private life.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And while we can't physically go upstairs, we can explore what Jerry tells us about the downstairs areas,
Right.
where Elvis spent most of his time. And those stories paint a very different picture than the isolated recluse loose narrative.
Right. He talks about watching Johnny Carson with friends having dinner together, even those late-night trips to get burgers.
Yeah.
Sounds like he's quite the night owl.
He definitely had a different schedule than most people. But, those stories highlight that he was very engaged with the world, even if it was on his own terms and within the boundaries that he created for himself,
Yeah. Makes you wonder what it was actually like to be a guest at Graceland. I mean, he's talking about just borrowing Elvis's Rolls Royce
Right.
and credit card to go to the car wash. Can you imagine?
I know, that story really stood out to me, too.
Yeah.
It just gives you a sense of the trust and the informality that existed within Elvis's inner circle,
Yeah.
It wasn't all pomp and circumstance. It seems like there were genuine friendships and a real sense of casualness.
But even with that casual atmosphere, Graceland still had this undeniable aura.
Right.
Jerry talks about driving up the driveway even decades later and feeling this wave of emotion, like returning home.
Well, that speaks to the power of place, doesn't it? Graceland isn't just a building. It's this repository of memories and emotions and experiences.
Yeah.
It's a tangible link to Elvis's legacy, but also to the personal histories of all the people who lived and worked there.
Yeah, and that leads us to our final myth, the idea that Graceland was somehow impersonal, just a museum-like space.
Right.
Jerry paints a completely different picture, doesn't he?
He does. He talks about the constant activity, the laughter, the music, the impromptu gatherings. It was a living, breathing home, not a sterile exhibit.
He even describes his room as being like Santa's workshop year-round because it was used to store Christmas decorations.
Oh, that's right.
Sometimes I feel that way about my apartment after the holidays.
Well, I doubt your apartment has a racquetball court or a jungle room.
That's true.
But, his description really emphasizes that Graceland wasn't just about extravagant decor.
Yeah.
It was about the people and the energy that they brought to that space.
Yeah, speaking of energy, Jerry mentions all the parties they used to have downstairs.
Right.
In the pool room and TV room. What did he say about those? I'm picturing, legendary gatherings with music dancing. Maybe even some Elvis impersonations.
While he doesn't go into detail about it, he does say that, those were the areas where they really let loose and had fun.
Okay.
And knowing Elvis's love for music and entertainment, I'm sure those parties were quite memorable.
I wonder if they ever watched Elvis movies down there just for kicks.
No, that's a funny thought. I don't know if he mentions that specifically, but he does talk about Elvis's love for late-night television.
Really?
Especially Johnny Carson.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you think he was the type to yell at the TV during the monologues?
Well, I can't say for sure, but
I could totally see that.
Jerry does say that Elvis had a great sense of humor and loved to laugh.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if he had some lively commentary going on during those late night shows.
It's fascinating to think about Elvis just hanging out, watching TV like a regular guy.
I know.
It makes him seem so much more relatable.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Jerry's perspective so valuable.
Right.
It allows us to see Elvis not just as this larger-than-life icon, but as a human being with everyday interests and desires for connection, just like the rest of us.
It's a good reminder that fame doesn't erase those basic human needs.
Right.
Even the king needed a place to unwind, have fun, and be himself. And for Elvis, that place was Graceland.
It was, but even with all this talk about informality and relaxation, there's still this sense of awe surrounding Graceland, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, especially with the upstairs remaining off limits.
Right.
It's like this forbidden realm that fuels our curiosity and adds to the mystique of Elvis.
It's fascinating how that one area remains frozen in time, a silent testament to Elvis's private life.
Right.
It creates a sort of physical barrier between the public Elvis and the private man.
Yeah.
Adding another layer to his already complex legacy.
It makes you wonder what stories those rooms could tell.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like up there? What objects did he treasure?
Right.
What thoughts and emotions filled those private spaces?
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are still missing. We have Jerry's insight into the downstairs areas, but the upstairs remains shrouded in mystery, leaving us to fill in the blanks with our own imaginations.
Maybe that's part of the enduring fascination with Elvis. We know so much about him, yet there are still these gaps, these unanswered questions that keep us wanting to learn more.
That's the beauty of exploring a figure like Elvis. The more you delve into his life and legacy, the more layers you uncover.
Yeah.
It's a journey of constant discovery.
As we've been talking about Graceland and all these unanswered questions, it's got me thinking about how we often view celebrities.
Yeah.
Through this narrow lens, like they're these untouchable figures living in a totally different reality.
Yeah.
But Jerry's stories really humanize Elvis, don't they?
They really do. It's so easy to get caught up in that image of Elvis as the king of rock and roll, this global superstar.
Yeah,
But when you hear Jerry talk about him, watching TV, cracking jokes, even getting frustrated when he lost a racquetball game,
right.
it reminds you that he was also just a guy.
It's a guy,
Mm.
right? And a guy who, despite all the fame and fortune, still craved those simple things.
Yeah.
Friendship, laughter, a sense of belonging, you know.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to something we talked about earlier, that idea that Graceland was really Elvis's sanctuary. It was his escape from all those pressures of fame.
His haven.
It wasn't just about the physical space, it was about the people and the atmosphere that he created there.
And that's what I find so intriguing about Graceland,
Yeah.
It wasn't just a house. It was a reflection of his personality, his values, his desires.
Right.
It was his world,
Mm-hmm.
meticulously crafted to provide him with the things that he craved the most.
And that's a powerful idea. We all have that ability to shape our environments, to create spaces that reflect who we are and what we value.
Okay, now you're really making me think. I'm starting to look around my own apartment and
Yes, sir.
wondering, what does this space say about me?
Right.
Maybe I need to add a racquetball court and a jungle room.
Maybe not those exact features. But the point is, we can all be more intentional about creating environments that really support our well-being and reflect our authentic selves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the heart of Graceland,
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway, for me at least,
Yeah.
is that it's so much more than just a mansion or museum.
Right.
It's really a testament to the power of creating a space where you can truly be yourself, surrounded by the people and things that you love.
Beautifully put. And it challenges us to consider those places in our own lives that hold that kind of significance for us,
Yeah.
Maybe it's a childhood home, a favorite park,
Yeah.
a cozy corner in a coffee shop,
Right.
Whatever it is, it's that space that nourishes our soul and reminds us of who we are at our core.
So to all of our listeners out there, we leave you with this final thought. What's your Graceland?
Yeah.
What place holds those special memories, those feelings of comfort and belonging? Take a moment to appreciate those spaces and maybe even think about how you can cultivate that sense of sanctuary
Right.
in other areas of your life.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll get to do a deep dive into your personal Graceland.
That's a great idea. Until then, thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey through Elvis Presley's world. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.